Abortion is perhaps the most important question that our society faces. And yet, there's no real discussion of the issue because both sides ignore the points that the other side is raising. I want to attempt to develop a third viewpoint that brings these viewpoints together into a meaningful discussion. On the one hand, we have pro-lifers who say it's murder, and therefore the doctors and the people that have abortions are murderers, and we've killed millions of people. The other side, on the other hand, says no, it's just a body part that the woman's decided to dispose of, and it has no significance until it's born. And somehow the two sides don't take the other one's issue and really answer it adequately. The first place where this derails is the pro-lifers claim that there's a great, in effect, like a genocide going on, millions of people dying, is a serious enough claim that it should be considered. On the other hand, the pro-choice position that a woman should be able to control her own body, again, is a profound issue and needs to be addressed. When I look at this issue, I'm reminded of when I worked in a hospice setting, taking care of people who were dying, and I was struck by somebody when they're dying, they finally take that last breath, and then there's no more. And there's something very, very profound about that. There's something that really grabs you, and you think, they've been breathing for 80-some years, and that was it. That was the last one. It's very natural to associate the end of life with the end of breathing. And yet, is it that simple? You know, can we take that point of view and say, therefore, life begins when a baby takes its first breath? It's certainly easy to understand why that association came to exist in our minds and became a part of our culture. And it's not hard to see that whether they think so consciously or not, this would seem to be the reasoning behind most pro-choice positions. Because they acknowledge that there's a living body in there, and that the genetics is different, and that, if it was born, it could cry before suffocating and dying finally. They understand all that. But what they have to maintain to preserve their position is the notion that the human spark, the human spirit, the human, whatever makes us special as individuals, doesn't enter the child until it takes that first breath. And what I find interesting about the perspective that I'm proposing is that, on the one hand, the pro-lifers have no grasp that there's some kind of rationale behind the pro-choice position, that there's a reason why they can feel okay about promoting what they're doing, because they honestly believe that there's that it's not a human being that's being destroyed. So there can be a real attitude on the pro-life people of condemning these people and making them feel terrible, or trying to make them feel terrible. But on the other hand, the pro-choice position is probably going to take what I'm saying, and most of the people from that position are going to say, "Oh, I don't think what he's saying, I think." But I think if you look behind most of the statements that pro-choicers are making, that there is the sort of assumption that I'm describing, the sort of assumption that the humanness enters at birth somehow magically. And what's interesting to me is the pro-choicers are the ones that point to the other side and say, "Oh, you're just forcing your religious opinions on people." Well, the pro-choicers may not even view themselves as religious people, but when they start deciding when a human life begins, they may not call it a soul, but whenever the humanness, whatever they want to call it, enters into a body, then they're engaging in a religious opinion. Once we see that, then we have to ask, okay, how can we look at this in a truly secular way? How can we look at this in a way where it's not the pro-lifers saying, "Oh, life begins at conception because that's what I think the Bible says," and then the other side says, "No, it begins at birth because I feel that that's just what it is, and that's what people have really kind of always believed." I mean, we celebrate a child's coming into existence, their birthday, on the day of their birth, right? The only answer I see to this dilemma is to conclude that it's just not scientific or objective to try to decide when you have a soul, when you have a personality, when the pain really hurts, when the sounds really register on a mind, when the dreams are a real mental state that are taking place in the womb. So once we throw out both opinions based on religion and personal belief, we're left with the science of the matter. We're left with, okay, is it mother's tissue? Well, it's not. I mean, the mother's a woman, of course, but the child may be, the fetus may be male, for example. You know, a sperm was daddy's tissue, the egg was mama's tissue, but when they came together, we have a new tissue, we have a new genetic identity. And I look at it like this. I've got a flash drive in my hand, and we'll say that I wrote a book, a marvelous book, a book that's so incredible that it will take 9 months to print out. It doesn't look like a book, but the information is there, and it can be printed out. But all the potential of that book is already present. You destroy this flash drive, you destroy my book, and it will never be, because I haven't copied it in a way that it can be replicated except to print out this flash drive. Well, that's what a fertilized egg is scientifically. It already is the pattern for everything that's going to happen physically and developmentally from a physical standpoint. And it may sound like I'm presenting a biased argument, but I just threw out, the assumption that we should view life as beginning at birth. And I said, okay, what does science tell us? Science tells us that biologically there's a new tissue and a new organism that is indeed feeding off the mother, but it's not part of the mother. It's a different organism. It's a parasite, if you will. But it's not part of the mother. And recall, for the sake of this discussion, we're supposing that we want to be totally objective and simply use scientific criteria. And, scientific criteria really can't answer, we can't prove whether a human has a soul, or whether a dog has a soul, or whether a white person has a soul, or a black person has a soul. Whether they both do, or neither do, or one does and the other doesn't. Because we don't have soul detectors. And even if we look at the question of how much mind is present, how much mind is present in a newborn? There's not that much difference from a newborn human and a newborn chimp for, I don't remember how many months, but it's like a year and a half or something, a year anyway, that the development is profoundly similar. And yet a baby is far more than a chimp. It has that potential that's already built into it. Again, the baby already has the design that's unfolding and developing. Its novel is already printing out, so to speak. One of the concerns that pro-lifers have is that there does seem to be an unconscious bias that almost every woman has to view her unborn child as a baby. I've never heard a woman who miscarried say, "Oh, my fetus stopped growing and came out of me." No, she says, "My baby died," and most of them are quite grieved about it and quite upset. And yet, when she doesn't want to deal with a baby, it's so convenient to pretend, I know that it's just, it's just this lifeless thing. I mean, it's biologically alive, but again, it's not really a person yet. So I can keep the person life from coming into existence. And this presumptive thing kicks in. So what we see is a lot of women who first of all, engage in intercourse without taking the precautions they might if they realize that they might really have to carry on and give birth if they get pregnant, because they think, I can have an abortion. But many, many women, when they go to have that abortion, something inside them stops them and they can't continue. And many other women, after they've had an abortion, it starts nagging at them, and something inside them starts accusing them mercilessly, and they start looking at other people's babies and feeling empty. They start looking at children playing years later and thinking, my child could have been there. And yet, here they are, they made this choice from the premise that, it's nothing. And yet, when they carry their next baby, they say, yes, I heard my baby's heartbeat. And as soon as they say that, they set themselves up to experience the condemnation in their hearts, the contradiction that they're living.